This video will look at the internet, the World Wide Web and virtual networks. Okay, so over the next few slides we're going to look at what the internet is in a bit more detail from before. We're going to look at how it differs from the World Wide Web. Again, we touched on this in the last video. We're going to look at what a web host is. We're going to try and understand how DNS works, that's domain name system. We're going to understand what the cloud is, and also how virtual networks can be formed using internet technology. So the internet, as we learnt in our last video, the internet is just a massive network of networks. Okay, loads and loads of computers connected together across the world. And often the World Wide Web and the internet are confused with one another, and they are completely separate things. So the World Wide Web is basically the network of websites which sit on top of the internet. So if the World Wide Web is one service of the internet, email might be another one, downloading might be another one, streaming might be another. These are all services that the internet can provide. Okay, so the World Wide Web is just the websites that sit on top of the internet. The internet in itself is kind of like the hardware that allows these services to happen. The internet is a network of networks, which spans the globe. Okay, so think of it as the hardware, and think of the World Wide Web as kind of like the software, or one type of software that you can have on the internet. Okay, so it's all the websites that are connected together. Okay, so web hosting. Well, to understand web hosting, we need to understand that a host in itself is just a computer on a network which will serve other users from different locations on the internet. So a web host in particular is one that offers the hosting of websites so that users can access those websites through their browsers. So they host their websites on their own servers, these web host companies. They provide 24/7 access. They'll often charge a small fee for the rental of the hard drive space or rental of the server space. And they will provide security, they'll provide backup services, and that's about it. That's what web hosts do. They just provide the facility for your websites that you want to go online to be hosted there in a secure way and constantly backed up, so that if there was a problem, you can always restore a previous version. Now, anyone with a little bit of know-how can create their own web host or their own web server at home. You just need a standard computer, install some specialist operating system, and as long as you can connect to the internet, you can host your websites at home. But the problem is that for the price of it and the risk, you'd have to make sure that you're backing up regularly. You'd have to make sure that you're always got the latest security, and for the cost of paying another service or another company to provide this service for you, it's usually more cost effective, less risky just to pay this company. Okay, so DNS. To understand DNS or domain name system, we need to understand what an IP address is, what ISP means, what URL means. Only after that can we really fully understand how DNS works. Okay, so let's have a look at each of these acronyms in a bit more detail. So an IP address, okay, it means Internet Protocol Address, and it's basically just a unique number given to each computer that connects to a network, okay, or connects to the internet. At any given time, no two computers can have the same address. And the whole reason for this is so that data knows where or which computer it needs to be sent to. So here's an example of an IP address. So just like postal address is used to identify a house, no two houses can have the same address, exactly the same for the internet. No two computers can have the same address. So a device's IP address will not necessarily remain the same each time it joins a network or goes online, so that's important to recognize. Okay, they're dynamic often. Okay, so you might connect to the internet and be given a different IP address. It depends on who's providing your service, of course, but just be aware that they're not necessarily hard-coded to you or to your computer. They may well change each time you join a network. Okay, ISP. So this means Internet Service Provider. Okay, so this is the company that provides you with your internet connection. You may be with BT, you may be with Sky, you may be with TalkTalk, but these are all examples of internet service providers. Okay, URL. This means Uniform Resource Locator, and it's just a fancy name or a fancy acronym for a web address. Okay, so bbc.co.uk, google.com, these are all URLs. Okay, so there's nothing more to know than that. So we've got ISP, Internet Service Provider, they provide you with your internet. URL, web address. We've got IP address, which is just a unique number given to each computer or each node that goes onto a network. So now we're probably in a position to understand what DNS is. Okay, so DNS, Domain Name System. So this is the system used to find the computer which hosts the website that you're looking for. So a DNS is used when you are trying to access any particular website. So this is how it works. Remember that every computer, and this includes web hosts that are on the internet, they all have their own IP address. And if you want your computer to connect to that computer, your computer has to know what the IP address is of the web hosting computer. Now, you as a human being, we're not very good at remembering lots of numbers. We're much better at remembering the company name, for example. So you can't remember the IP address of the computer which hosts any particular website, but you might well be able to remember its address. So, for example, if you want to access the BBC website, it's much easier to remember bbc.co.uk as opposed to a string of numbers. So what you do is you type that into your browser. You type in www.bbc.co.uk into your browser. So that URL is then sent to your ISP, to your internet service provider. It's sent to BT or Sky. And they then look up that URL that you've typed in, that web address, in their DNS, in their you can kind of think of it as their address book. Okay? So they look it up in their domain name system. So their domain name system is a big list of lots and lots of different web addresses, and next to the web addresses are the IP address of that particular web address. In other words, which computer on the internet, or the address of the computer on the internet which hosts that particular website. So you type in bbc.co.uk, the ISP will then look up that URL and will find the relevant or the IP address for that particular website, and it will send it back to your computer. Your computer has now got the IP address that can directly communicate with that web host and will then allow you to access the website. So you can now communicate with the computer which hosts the website on the internet directly. And that is all there is to DNS. Okay, it's a glorified lookup. Okay, it's a glorified address book. You type in a URL, the DNS will return the corresponding IP address. Okay, so the cloud. We talk about the cloud a lot in the 21st century. What do we mean by the cloud? Because it isn't really just those white fluffy things in the sky. Okay, so the cloud is a network of servers hosted on the internet which offer a range of services to store and process data. Okay, so that's what the cloud is. Just loads and loads of servers, or a group of servers on the internet which offer services. So in particular, cloud computing relates to online services provided by companies. Now, cloud computing could be things like Office 365 or Google Docs, which allow you to go online and go through some work with Office software. Cloud storage is another example of cloud computing. So you may well have a Google Drive account, you might have a Dropbox account. That's an example of cloud computing. And streaming services like Netflix and Spotify, they are also cloud computing services, obviously providing you the ability to watch films and listen to music, providing that you've got internet access and you pay a fee. So why would a company use a service such as Office 365? Why don't companies just purchase the software and install it on their local network? Why might a company use that service? Well, first of all, they don't need to actually have that huge upfront cost. Okay, they don't need to buy and install the software. Any connected computer can access the service. It doesn't have to be just a computer on the network, so that can provide benefits. So the people that work for that company can access the service from home, from their home computer. There's no need to upgrade the software. So because it's online, because it's an online service, Office 365, for example, or Google Drive will update their software when they want to push out an update. They don't need to then give it to a network manager to install updates and things like that on the local network. Collaboration can occur with multiple people working on the same document at once. That's a really good thing about having cloud computing services such as Office 365. Work's automatically saved and backed up. And all of these things generally lead to lower costs. Okay, it's less work for a company because all that work is outsourced to Microsoft, for example, or Google. So it's much lower costs overall. However, what's really important to recognize is that because you are doing work outside of your local network, it means that you don't have full control over what happens to the data that you might be putting online. Because sensitive company data might be stored in another country. For example, Google might have a data center in California. And California might have different laws compared to those laws in the UK about data protection. So it's really important that a company is aware of that and takes the right precautions. And also, over time, if it might have smaller costs up front, but if you're renting this service over time, costs could match those that would be if you actually installed the software on your own network and kept that updated. So it's things to consider. The other thing is that you're completely reliant on a network, on the internet. So whereas if you installed software on your own computer in a company or on your local area network, if the internet went down and your network was still live, then you could still do work. So it is completely reliant on the internet. Okay, virtual networks. So we should know from the previous lesson that LANs, local area networks, are computers that cover a small geographical location, and that wide area networks are networks of computer over a wider geographical area. And for both types of network, obviously it's physical hardware which is connecting those computers together. They're physical networks. Now, a virtual network is where either a LAN or a WAN is split up into smaller networks using software. So software subdivides a physical network into smaller ones. That's what a virtual network is. Now, for local area networks, software can redivide a local area network into a series of smaller networks so that groups of people can work separately from other members in the company. So if you think about a local area network, maybe in a school you might have 300 computers that are all connected together. It might be that a certain group of people want to use a small part of that network to communicate privately away from other people in the school. So a virtual network could allow that to happen. So if we had software that redivided the local area network into a smaller network, then that virtual network would provide that service. And because it's software which enables the network to partition itself, it's known as a virtual network. Now, the same thing can happen with the wide area network, with a wide area network. Now, because the wide area network is spread across a much larger geographical area, there are more issues when it comes to security, because often wide area networks will make use of internet. So security is really, really important. So software can redivide a wide area network into smaller networks, just like we heard before, so that small groups of people can communicate separately from other groups. But because the internet is used by everybody across the world, these networks have to have added security, and that is done through encryption. And simply because of this added security, these virtual networks, because it's a virtual network on a wide area network, it's known as a private network, a virtual private network. But of course, because they're created through the use of software, as I said, it's virtual. It's a virtual private network, a VPN.